interventions are the teachers or whoever's working, coordinating your check in, check out. And then for the individualized at the red, it's going to be the teacher who is working directly with that student to build that skill or collecting the data. Who evaluates it? For the green, it's going to be that PBS team. For the yellow, it may be a separate group of people that might be part of the PBS team, but they're just focusing on looking at their data. And then here, if you have student-centered teams around those individual students where the positive behavior intervention plans were developed, they'd be looking at that data. Questions about that? Okay, so this is what your data look like if you collect it just one time a month. Does that tell you how well you're doing? Okay, how about once every 2 weeks? Does that help tell you how well you're doing? How about one time a week? Starting to get better, right? This is if you collect every day. It makes a big difference. So here, and I don't know why my green line keeps moving, but that's the goal you have for the student. But if you're collecting data on an individual student every day, you can see how you can make decisions much better and faster on how well things are going than if you did it just once a month. It's like, yep, here's your point. And what if they were absent that day? Data. So the whole purpose of this is to show we can get a lot more information if we look at it throughout. And again, here's collecting it throughout the day. We're seeing the average % of students making their points, doing what they're supposed to on the check-in, check-out. This period, these two, are the lowest. Well, I would go in and say we may have a systems issue where the teacher, something's going on where those students aren't being able to get their points during that time. All right, and then here we have on our Florida website, it's a progress monitoring tool, a way that you can put everything into an Excel spreadsheet, and then it can give you your points. You can enter your points in your graph, and it's free. So we've got to have data to enter. We've got to analyze it in order to make decisions. So we have to have decision rules too, and this is very critical because that's got to help us determine, are we doing well? And you base these decision rules based upon the needs of your school. So some of our schools have, they've in the past 7,000 discipline incidents that they've recorded. I've had one high school that had over 16,000 recorded tardies to class. They had a major systems issue, and they only had 700 kids in the whole school. It was insane. So you have to think of your decision rules, because we set goals for our students, and sometimes it's if I can get them to stay in their seat for 15 minutes during reading instruction, then I've had success. Then eventually you start to, I'm going to move on you. And then you start to have success, you increase it to 20 minutes, you increase it to 25, you get excited. Well, as school teams, you've got to do the same thing. You've got to determine, okay, based on our data, if you typically are having, say, 500 discipline incidents, and you're seeing that students overall, well, what's going to be your goal? You guys have to have a goal. Maybe it's, okay, we would like to be down to 400. And we'll be excited. Well, let's get even better. Let's get down to 200. So you put yourself on your own behavior intervention plan. You don't realize it. So because we're all having to change our behavior. So think about, because if we come up with decision rules, that helps us determine how well people are responding. So here's an example. This one school said if students are receiving 2 or more discipline incidents by October, and they've scored a 7 or higher, so this was their universal screener they were using, they're going to be considered for yellow interventions. That was what that one school decided. Students with internalizing behaviors, they're going to receive coping CAT. That's another evidence-based strategy. Target behaviors will be added to students' behavior report cards if their goal was met less than 7 out of 10 days. So they'll add more specific behaviors and goals for those children to work on if their data are showing they're not responding. So when a student meets their goal 8 out of 10 days, we'll increase their goal by 5%. This gives you kind of some structure so you can determine how are we going to continue to improve, but at what point are we going to determine students aren't doing well, what's going to be our strategies for dealing with that. All right, things to consider: determining students in need of the yellow interventions, setting a goal, and determining are they responding positively, is it questionable, or is it a poor response, and what are you going to do if it is a poor response or it's questionable. So assure that student has contact with the yellow or the green interventions. You've got to determine whether the student actually has skills to participate in this new intervention. If you're going to require them to speak to an adult and they're a nonverbal student, it's going to be a problem. Okay, and that's just a gross example, but that's one way. Match the possible functions of the student's behavior. So again, you could try check and check out for everybody, but students that are engaging in problem behavior to get away from adults, they're not going to do so well with check and check out. And also, if you're using a particular intervention that was normed on a particular population, you have to remember, well, maybe it's not working with your student because it's a completely different type of population that intervention was designed for. So we want to set the students up to succeed, so you don't want the goal to be 100% at the beginning. How are you going to adjust the goal? At what point are you going to let 2 days go by, 3 days go by, see how well they're doing, and maybe you have to lower the goal, get them excited, build some skills, and you can raise it again. And again, considering which skills are taught, that scope and sequence of our curriculum, and how fast are they progressing. And then there's something for you to refer to is going through the decision rules for each intervention that you may choose for yellow. So here, this is a poor or a questionable response. This student, how does it look like they're doing?
Not so well.
Not so well, and that's pretty consistent. But this student, how are they doing?
Not so well.
Right, they're not doing so well either because the goal is here in the green. So both students, this student is doing better than this one, but technically, they're never going to close that gap, are they? So that is why you need decision rules to determine at what point are we going to stop. Why would we let this go on for so many days of doing not so well? Here, let's look at our poor or questionable responses. This student, there's a poor response. This student, I'm guessing, is a poor response because they haven't gone to school. I would want to give them credit. It was that bad. But some of these are doing well, but we've got a lot that are not doing well. Okay? So, and I give you some decision rules to look at for if it's a positive response, how you set up your decision rules that the students are doing well, how you set your decision rules up if they're doing questionable and how you make that determination, and then if there's a poor response, what you need to do for that. And again, because our goal is we want the students to continue to increase, because if our goals are here, we've got to close that gap, and we've got to see the data starting to close that gap. So here, how would you classify Stephen's response here? This was the first goal we put him at. He's making it, right? Okay, then all of a sudden we've got a big goal up here. We're going to have to work hard to boost that, right? And that's what we think as a teacher. What else do we need to do for interventions to help build that skill up? Here, the decision rule might be after 10 days of meeting or exceeding the goal, we're going to increase it by 5%. That's where you slowly start to raise the benchmark. How would you classify Crystal's response? Here's the goal. Yeah, they're not doing well. Again, you have to go back to your decision rule. If the goal isn't met within 1 week, we're going to come up with more specific goals for that student. And or we may reduce our expectation, bring it down a little bit. All right, so again, Tier 2 behavior is dealing with the yellow interventions is similar for academics. We've got to have a quick way to collect our data, and there must be some decision rules for helping us determine how well the students are responding. And the reason I wanted to go through that section is because it's going to make, I think, a lot more sense for you when we talk about the red interventions, because they're going to be getting a lot of the same, you'll be doing check and check out, the same points, and you'll have to see of that individual student. Oftentimes we treat them in isolation of the rest of the school, and the problem is then they are separate, and they're not being successful on campus because we've set up green interventions. We may have decision rules, but we're not necessarily using those decision rules when kids getting red interventions, and I don't know why we do that. So I wanted you to see how this all fits within that whole continuum. So I'm going to give you a break, and then we'll be talking only on the red. Anita will be happy. We think that it's something negative, but honestly it's anything we say or do. And so behavior is learned. And that's the part to think about. Everything we do is behavior. Riding a bicycle is behavior. Talking is behavior. When somebody smiles at you and you smile back, that is a learned behavior. And so there are reasons why we do all of this. So sometimes when people act a certain way, think of adults that you interact with, in the workplace. Sometimes you go, why would they do that? But think of that whole child outside of the box. The curriculum, the instruction, the home life, the family, the peers, the relationships. Our adults have those same boxes, and they were instructed differently. They were reinforced for different things. They have other issues on their plate that they're dealing with. But what's important to know is that do you have the ice cream truck? That comes, okay, we have the ice cream truck that comes in our neighborhood, and I get frustrated every time I hear him down the street.
The bell.
Yes, because my kids do the same thing every time, and spend all their money on this ice cream. So, but it's learned. You hear the music, you know right away. Last night at dinner, we were talking about Santa Claus, and instantly you guys start singing the song, and it was just. That doesn't happen by chance. Lots of that was learned over the years. And you felt good about yourself.
Oh, yes.
So let's think about how we increase behavior, regardless of what that behavior looks like. There's two different ways. There's positive and there's negative. Positive is the addition of something that occurs right after the behavior. So you smile, somebody smiles at you, you smile back. That's that positive response. But a negative one is when we're removing an unpleasant stimulus when that behavior occurs. So, erasing the name from a board. You misbehave, your name's removed from the board. Okay, that might stop you from behaving inappropriately. So there's just two different ways in which we can respond to the behavior that'll determine whether we keep doing it or not. How we decrease it, another way is a punisher, where we add an unpleasant event after a behavior that decreases the likelihood of that behavior from occurring again. In the old days, we used to have a buzzer, and somebody would get buzzed from it. I think an example of this is I had horses growing up, and sometimes they would try to scratch their necks on the fence, and they may knock the fence down, and then all of a sudden, you see your horse going by in a place he's not supposed to be. So to prevent that, we would put this little electric wire just on the top pole. And that one time was just enough that they would know they wouldn't try to scratch their necks and the fence wouldn't get pushed down. That was a punisher. It's not a recommended strategy for children. Make notes, that is not PBS, okay? It's just an example. Yes?
Can you use it on teachers?
You could, yes. Again, they're different red level interventions. Yeah. They might not like you as director anymore. So we have to make sure that, though, that it fits that function of the behavior. So that's the part that's important, because we think about what happens in the main office if a student is sent to the office for a discipline incident. What happens in that main office? Because we may think that it's punishing to the child to be sent out of the classroom, which for some it really would be. For my daughter, that would devastate her, and it would take her days to recover, and I guarantee it would never ever happen again. For my son, he'd probably look at it like, yeah, so what? I got to see a lot of friends on the way. So you have to think about that. And so also too, there are times kids get to the office and there's a lot of positive interaction that may go on, or they get to hear all kinds of good stuff about school. The phone calls coming in, parents coming in, and they get to hear a lot, and they love that. So that we don't realize we may accidentally be reinforcing them during that time. So trying to figure out what is that function of the behavior, that purpose that behavior serves that student. What do they get? You know, do they get something tangible? Do they get a ticket? Do they get, students that steal money, they get money. You know, when they take lunch money from other kids, they get attention. If they go out of the room and they put their head down and go to sleep, they get that sensory need met. So I think it's very important for us to understand what people are getting for that behavior, because when we go to try to prevent it, that need still needs to be met for that person. So if you think about, you don't want people to sleep during a lecture, but at some point, if they're not getting sleep, they still need sleep, but there's an appropriate way to get it. So for our students, we have to think about some of our students in the United States, they're so poor, they don't know where they're sleeping, their family is sleeping each night, they may be sleeping in cars, or they're sleeping on a mattress where the springs are keeping them up all night. They come to school, they're hungry, and because they didn't have dinner, they didn't have breakfast, and they are tired. Okay? It's not that they want to be bad kids, it's not that they don't like the teacher, but physically they cannot do it. You know, can we force them to stay awake? Well, we try, and that's how we get into these power struggles. That's why we get ineffective teaching that happens. That's why we get kids that's sent to the office and teachers leave the profession because they're frustrated. As opposed to, you know what? You need some sleep and you need some food. I'm going to pull something from my closet here. Here's some crackers and go to sleep. And we found that kids that had this, if we let them go and sleep for 2 hours, it was so restful. They came back, they learned everything the rest of the day. We never had problems. So you choose, what do we want to fight? Okay? Yeah, we can't fix that they sleep in a car. We can't get jobs necessarily for their parents or a home for them, but we can take care of that time we're with them. So, but we have to understand the function of what's happening for why those behaviors are occurring. So we've got to think about what's setting this behavior off, what's going on. So I want you to think of that box we talked about this morning of all these different events, and thinking outside of the box, and thinking about what's happening in the environment that we may need, that might be setting this behavior off. Again, you start to hear the ice cream truck coming, you're conditioned. You're like, oh, quick, go get your money, run as fast as you can. What happens in schools at certain times? They maybe start to smell the cafeteria when they're cooking, getting ready for the lunch. We tend to see a lot of behavior problems occur right before lunch. It could be that the kids aren't hungry, but they start to smell food, they get hungry. Does that happen to you? Yes, yes. So I woke up hungry this morning. I had no business being hungry. We ate so much food last night, but I was hungry. So I don't know what, but I haven't finished my FBA on myself. So You have to think about identify and define the problem behavior, because that's what we want to change. Identify the problems or the patterns in the behavior. When does it occur most often? What types of things tend to set the behavior off? And what do we tend to do when the behavior occurs? Those are our consequences. When we identify that function of the behavior, we're going to come up with the best guess or our hypothesis. We're going to develop a plan, and then we're going to monitor to see how it works. Can you see how this process is similar to that problem-solving process that I talked about? Okay, so let's identify the problem behavior. We've got to be able to observe it. We've got to be able to measure it. We've got to make sure it's accurate and it's detailed. Can you hear it? Can you see it? And as my son would say, and can you smell it? You know, so it's, yeah, so define problem behavior. So here, tantrum. Well, what does that mean? Okay, but here they scream, fall to the floor, pound their fists on the floor. Okay, I can see that. I can hear that. That's the way we can measure it. But if they say, yeah, the tantrum, I don't know what that means. A tantrum. Got it?
Yes.
Okay. They're angry all the time. Well, what does that mean? A lot of us have an idea of that, but okay, they throw materials on the floor when asked to do math tasks. Okay, I can see that. I can measure that. A common one we hear in the schools is they're lazy. You know that word lazy?
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? We all have an idea by definition of what lazy is, but what does that look like? How are you going to measure it? And what you start to find is the minute you identify the function of that behavior, of why that student seems lazy, all of a sudden you realize that word doesn't fit. Because there's other variables, reasons why that's occurring. So, there's different ways that we collect these data. We can look at their previous records from the school. We can interview them. There's checklists that can be done. And we can go in and collect direct data on that student or train the teacher to help collect that data. But the big thing we want to identify is what sets the behavior off, the trigger. What is the behavior? What does it look like? And what do we do immediately after the behavior occurs? And this is where us in PBS, we're going to take it and we're going to change that to help set the occasion that this will no longer set this behavior off. That's the prevention piece of it. But then we're going to come in and teach a new skill, a new behavior skill that meets the same function. So if it was to get attention, we need to teach them a new way to get attention. Okay, so that's the replacement behavior, the teaching aspect of PBS. But then we're going to respond differently. And that's where we're changing and discouraging problem behaviors from occurring in PBS. We're going to stop accidentally reinforcing them when they go back to that old behavior. But we're going to make sure if it was for attention, we're going to give them attention like crazy when they use that new skill. And hopefully make it to 38 times so that they'll get it imprinted in their head. Okay, so what happens immediately before the behavior? What was the action of the student and what happened immediately after the behavior? And this is where we have to get critical as educators because there are times we are accidentally causing the behavior. We may not be meaning to do it directly, but it happens. So, all kinds of things. Again, behavior, anything a person says or does. The antecedent, these are all things that can set the behavior off. They could have a medical condition. Again, they didn't get their sleep the night before. Parents do a great job giving them some medication before school that might make them sleepy, and they forget to tell the school. Okay? What is the curriculum? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? How is it being instructed to them? You know, I talked yesterday that I was in some really dynamic classrooms. The teachers were constantly working with material. They did all kinds of things to keep the kids interested and engaged. Well, if it's boring, we've all had boring teachers at times. kids start to look for other things to do, or they disengage. And then what's going on for personal or control issues? Because again, if they don't feel they have control and safety outside of school, they might be trying to get those needs met in school. And that's what's helping to set the behavior off. Then a consequence is what types of attention, do they get something for it, do they get to avoid something, or do they get something sensory, like they're able to get some sleep for that. So all of this continues the cycle for why we do what we do. So it's just trying to figure. So I want you guys now to guess. It's going to be a game show. Doesn't this look just like me? This looks just like you, right? Right. That was a joke.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask you if you think it's for escaping, if you think it's for attention, if you think it's for something sensory, you don't know, or I'm not paying attention. You won't raise your hand, I'll know that. So, all right, the behavior is, the student's behavior is going to be here. Again, the antecedent, what happens right before the behavior. The consequence is what happens right after the behavior. So, John fights with his girlfriend before school. Oh, this is blocking it. And the teacher asks him a question. John stares at his paper, gets up, kicks his desk, and stomps out. Teacher tells John to stop and get back to his seat. She writes a note to the principal. What do you think the function of his behavior is? What's your guess? How many people think it's for attention? Raise your hand. Why do you think it's for attention?
Maybe she wants to say that she's going to ask what's going on.
Could be. He might want the attention from his teacher, so then he can finally start to talk to her about what's going on with his girlfriend. That could be. What else could it be? How many think it's for escaping? Yeah, and why do you think it's to escape? It's too difficult altogether? Yeah, and that would be my first guess too, that it's probably to escape. You know, because you think about it, when have you gone to work and something has happened at home? You know, I know there's been times like my dog likes to get out and then he runs the neighborhood and that delays me at least 20 minutes. And so then you may get to the office and you realize you have to do some task that you really don't enjoy. And you just go, oh, come on. Well, our kids don't have the skills to deal with that appropriately, so they may get up and leave the room, right? Or they say, no, F you, not doing it. You know, so here, the possible function, when he's asked to do a non-preferred independent assignment requiring writing, he will leave class to avoid the work. It's more likely to occur when he gets in a fight with his girlfriend. All right, so can we control him from being able to get in a fight with his girlfriend? No. We just have to know we can't control everything. But it would help us if we could teach him a way to communicate to us when he comes into school, in the classroom, to say, I've had a bad day today. Okay, that's enough for me to know I'm not going to start him with a non-preferred independent activity that he hates. That's how we have to start working together and communicating, but it takes skills for that. Questions about that one? Okay, let's go to this one. Susan calls Brenda a creep face and laughs at her. Brenda punches Susan on the arm. Susan stops laughing and walks away. How many of you think it's for attention? You're still thinking. I'll give you a chance to process. Yeah. You can't look in your handouts for the answer. That's cheating. How many think it's for attention? Okay, how many think it's to escape? Why do you think it's for escape?
She don't want to tell to Susan she don't like it.
that she doesn't have.
Yeah, think about it. Susan, let's think about it. When other students call her names and laugh at her, Brenda hits them because it makes them go away. Yeah, and that used to happen with my son in kindergarten. He found he didn't have the words yet to explain, so he found his fist worked just fine. And he would just hit a kid, the kid would leave. So he would use that skill. It works. You use what works for you. So it got to be when we had to start teaching him, you know, I need space. And my daughter said, no, you can't teach him that. You did that for me and it didn't work. Nobody knows what that means. So we said, okay, you need to tell the kids, step away. You're too close, step away. And he did. I watched him. He said to the kid, step away. And the kid looked at him like, what? And he goes, again, again. And you see this little kid go. Then he goes, that's good. And he went back to work. Okay? The key is going to be he got what he wanted. He was able to escape. He got someone out of his space. But if those words don't work, what's he going to go back to? Using his fist, because that works. That's called replacement behavior. But you have to find out why the behavior is occurring first to figure out what the right replacement behavior is going to be. So there's two types of triggers, a slow trigger and a fast trigger. Slow triggers are what we call setting events. That could be, you're sleeping in a car the night before. Okay, these are the ones that are, as educators, we cannot control. Fast triggers are what happened immediately before. These are the ones that we are always able to change. Typically, it's us asking them to do something they don't want to do. Depending what happened the night before, it may set them off. Slow triggers, oversleeping, no breakfast, they forgot their medication, they had a fight with somebody. Our fast triggers, we ask them to do an assignment. Somebody behind them is teasing them. Teacher may be giving help to another student. It may be consistent, or it may only occur when there's specific events, such as every time you're asked to open a book, that might be enough to set a student off. Or every time we get to large group reading instruction, that sets them off. And that's what we have to think about. Is it too hard for them? Is it too easy? Is it that they're afraid that their peers will laugh at them because they don't read well? All things that we can change in a classroom. And those consequences are what happens immediately after the behavior. What does the student get? What is the payoff for it? So let's talk about developing these best guess. This is our hypothesis. It's an informed, assessment-based explanation of the target behavior. And now my daughter, she's almost 11, and she'll say to me, gosh, Dad's in a really bad mood tonight. And I just said, yeah, he's had a long day. He had lots of difficult patients today. So let's give him some space. And she'll say, well, my hypothesis is that he didn't take enough breaks today. You know, and so that's exactly, but again, it's a best guess. It runs in a family. So you've got to have a best guess, but we've got to use our data to determine, are we accurate with that? So here's a formula to help us develop that hypothesis. When the trigger happens, when that antecedent happens, this behavior occurs. You describe what that looks like in order to get or escape something, okay? Which is the function. So let's look at this one. After Chris visits his brother in jail, okay, jail's a setting event, all right? And he's asked to complete a task independently. That's the fast trigger, what the teacher did. Chris shuts his book and puts his head down. That's the behavior. All right? So that the teacher comes over and talks to him and he gets attention, the function. And think about it. We can't get his brother out of jail. We can't stop him from going to see his brother. But if we're able to teach him how to communicate with us or get that parent involvement to help us understand what might have happened on the weekend, we may know that we're going to approach him differently. But we also need to teach him when to get good at communicating with us and coming in and giving us, is it going to be one of these days or one of these days? And we figure out as teachers what types of supports they need to be successful. Questions about that? Okay. And it doesn't mean that the students are always getting what they want. But it means initially we have to figure out what's happening. We've got to go in and teach them new skills. And then we know we're human. We don't have good days. But there's a more appropriate ways in how to cope with those bad days than what the students have been doing. And so that's how we figure out how to teach them new skills. Yeah.
What can the teacher do? Not asking to make this.
What I would probably do,
Question?
yeah, so what would the teacher do instead? Okay, so if we find out, if I have a good relationship with the mother, I would hope to set up a home journal communication log. And so maybe the parent may send to me and say, we went and visited in the jail, and that may be enough to me going, oh, he's going to be sad, he misses his brother. I'm going to need to spend some extra time with him before I ask him to do any work, so that he can talk about it, he can process that, and then we'll get to the work. But what's happening is he engages in problem behavior, and then he gets that, and what we want to do is we want to switch it. So the more setting events we can find out, we can provide them early and prevent the behavior from happening. But eventually, when Chris starts to realize this is safe and there's a different way to do it, the teacher can systematically start teaching Chris to come in and tell her, what did you do the night before? And Chris can start to learn these internal sensors of when I need a break, or